Down at the Beneteau stand here at the Southampton Boat Show, there's a new Antares 7, as you can see just here. But what we really want to see here this morning is actually the Antares 8. Now, this was introduced at last year's Southampton show, but it was kind of a soft launch because they didn't have any stock and weren't sure whether they're going to be able to provide it for their customers. But now, with stock in hand, they're giving it the attention it deserves, and we're going to step on board and take a closer look at what Beneteau tells us is the ultimate family weekender. Now, this is a 27-foot boat with a pretty generous beam just in excess of 9 feet and an asymmetrical layout, an offset pilot house, offset to port to make the most of that internal space and to open up a decent starboard walkway. But more of that in a second. First, let's take a quick look at the stern here. You have nice big platforms on either side of the Suzuki DF200. And because there's no walkway on this port side, this is a great place to locate your shore power, keeps it well out of the way. No tripping over cables there. There's no way to make your way across from one side to the other, so we have to step back off and then back on at the starboard side, where there's a handy rail just next to a telescopic ladder that pops out and drops down from the aft end there. But on this boat, this is new on the Antares 8, as a standard feature, as you can see, you can make it much simpler by simply stepping through that new starboard side door straight off the pontoon into the centre of the cockpit. It's a very welcome little device, that, and of course if you're into your fishing, then that could be a useful asset for dragging your fish on board as well. If we move further aft and carry on our inspections back here, as you can see, we have a little drained locker there. Now, for the non-fisherman like me, I'd probably fill that with a bit of ice and a couple of 4-packs and just enjoy a beer on the aft bench. But of course you can, with gentle modifications, use that as a compact bait well if fishing is your thing. And as you can see, this whole aft bench can be slid forward on these deck runners, once you've removed the table of course, and that enables you to trim the engine out fully, and it also enables you to take a seat when you've got the aft canopies put in position. And on this port side we have another feature that kind of comes from the fishing world, but like so many fishing features, kind of makes sense from a general recreational perspective, and that's this little fold down seat on the port side that gives you proper C-shaped seating all the way around this table. It's interesting here that we also have, this is an option incidentally, an aft-facing seat just at the back end of those patio doors with a neat little cool box beneath. And it's also quite interesting to note, actually, it's very topical, that the table here is built from fiberglass. It's quite heavy duty, and relatively expensive to produce, I'd have thought. But the thing is that Beneteau were struggling to get hold of the various wood fixtures and fittings that they needed. So the table is fiberglass and will remain that way. And this is pretty much the last teak deck you'll see on the Antares 8, because they're generally speccing those now with a kind of hard-wearing outdoor carpet, or else with flexi-teak, just to make sure that as a volume producer their production isn't held up by troublesome supplies. Here, if we fold that seat back up, that's easily done with one hand. You see there's a little foam backrest that also doubles as a kind of thigh brace if you fancy doing a bit of fishing. But of course, as a range, the Antares range, that tends to cater as much for fishing as it does for family cruising, this entire aft bench can be swapped for a fishing unit, and we have one of those on a neighbouring boat, which I'll just go and take a quick look at so you can see exactly what it is. Now, this is the Flyer 8 here, similar hull length, excuse me gents, I'll just squeeze past, similar hull length, but an identical unit which you can spec instead of that aft bench if fishing is your thing. You still get a fold down seat, as you can see, plus a selection of work surfaces and bait wells and so on, and a little shower here for washing the deck down, and some grab rails at the back, and obviously some rod holders built into the back end of that unit. So that's quite a neat feature and kind of transforms the deck a little bit, also opens the deck out, as you can see. As for storage, with this regular bench we've got a good space inside that back end there. Nice regular space. We also have a lovely big space on the starboard side, if I can get that open. There we are, you see it extends a good way aft and a good way forward, and that's a great spot to pop your skis if that's your thing. And on the port side, beneath that fold down seat, we also have a little space, but it's pretty much filled by the batteries, which are nicely secured and tucked away. And then in the aft edge of that moulding we have your gas locker. And a neat little seat cushion perched on top there. There's also a decent storage space beneath the deck itself. If we remove that heavyweight table, slide out that cool box, you'll see there's a little split in the mouldings for this forward seat, which means that when you elevate this, the entire unit comes right up. Now most of that is filled with the fuel tanks, but there is a decent space ahead of that, again of a useful sort of shape and size for stowing bulky bits of gear that you don't need to hand. And I should mention that while this table doesn't drop down to create any kind of infill, there's actually a dedicated frame stowed further forward that runs from this aft edge to this forward edge at that forward bench and creates an entirely unbroken sunbathing platform that preserves the walkways to starboard, so you can use that big dedicated starboard walkway to access the bow without any obstruction. And as we move along that starboard side, again we've got easy access to the grab rails on the rooftop and a good bracing position with that elevated guardrail. Just a bit more space to plant your feet, and there's plenty of good grippy fiberglass underfoot. There's no slipping on this deck at all. It's a workmanlike bow, you have to say. There's a hatch to chuck stuff down into the forward cabin, and also to admit a bit of light down there. There's also a good size, as you can see, a really good size of anchor locker with a windlass that can be operated remotely from the helm. There are no cushions, no sunbathing space here, but given the facilities aft, you don't especially need that. And I have to say, if you look at the shape of the mouldings here, if I drop the camera down just a little bit more, you'll see that it's quite elevated, quite substantially elevated, and that suggests good things about the cruising and weekending potential of the cabin down below. As we step into the pilot house itself through those aft patio doors, you have to say, for a boat of this length, the scale of the space is impressive. It's used for a starboard galley, a compact galley unit with a single burner and a sink, a decent size of sink there. You also get a little fridge beneath the skipper's seat. Again, a good size of fridge with a compact freezer compartment there as well. Plus a little bit of storage, which as yet doesn't seem to be lined with any shelving or trays, but it's certainly of a good scale. If we spin around and look at the seating area, well, we have a two-man aft bench facing forward across the table, and we have a nicely raised, again, one or two man co-pilot seat with excellent visibility all round through that one-piece screen, quite narrow mullions, and because it's quite nicely elevated, the view's excellent. We also get an opening window here for ventilation, very bright, and we have a relatively compact but very welcome manually operated sunroof directly overhead. But if you want to use this port side as a more sociable dining station, you can simply take the backrest of this co-pilot seat, drop it down. There's a little thumb screw that enables you to adjust the backrest, and as you move that forward it also drops down a level, so you're at the same level as the seat aft, which is a very useful feature. And then you can also rotate that helm seat, and because there's a fridge below you, there's no room for a footrest to keep yourself comfy while you're perching up there. But I've just had a little sit down in there myself, and actually this moulding here falls very naturally to hand, so it's quite a comfortable position and quite a sociable position. You're not too elevated above the level of the other diners, so you could easily sit 5 people in here for a nice relaxed lunch or dinner. As regards storage in this pilot house, well, beneath the 2 deck hatches here in the centre, we basically have just access to the tanks. And on this port side, beneath the aft bench, we have the battery switches. But there is a little bit of storage beneath that aft bench. And there's also quite a neat trick here on this port side. If we lift this little hatch, you can see that there are frameworks and cushions. They're the bits and bobs that enable us to turn that aft cockpit into a proper dedicated sunbathing area. And if I move further forward past this hinged hatch, which kind of gives a clue to what we're going to see, well, inside the cabin, beneath that entire port side furniture section, as you can see, we've got a vast area for storing all the big bits and bobs that on many boats of this size would kind of clutter about and fill your main storage spaces and get in the way. But there's a dedicated spot for all of these things, plus extra space for plenty more. That's a very neat feature indeed. In spite of all that pilot house volume, we actually have genuine weekending facilities down here. As you can see, it's not a long space, but in order to make it practical, they've arranged this double berth on the diagonal. And when you lie down, I'm a 6-footer, there's a good couple of inches spare top and bottom for me. And these cushions that help fill in that diagonal bed, you can remove those so that you give yourself a better arc for the door to the heads to open, and you also give yourself a space to sit down and change in the morning. If we take a look into that head compartment itself, you'll see it occupies a very good footprint. There's no standing room, of course, but there's plenty of space to sit and do your business. There's a very good size of sink there too, plus another opening porthole there on the starboard side to give you a bit of light and a bit of ventilation. Back out at the helm, well, there's not a huge amount of space for that helm, but there's everything you need. We've got the bolstered seat with the wraparound sides, it looks good and comfortable. Down below we've got an elevated foot brace built into the moulding, and we also have this kind of false floor, so if you're a little shorter you can perch yourself on that and adopt the standing position. If you're slightly taller, which I'm happy to say I am, then you can just use that fiberglass deck and get an extra 2 or 3 inches of space there. And when you stand in at the helm itself, you'll notice there's no trim tabs fitted to this boat, but there's a good space just next to the bow thruster that would be perfect for them. Because it's quite a narrow helm, of course, we also have the throttle, not on the dash top of course, but mounted on the mouldings to starboard there on the side, in a very comfortable position. There's a good bit of space there as well for your plotters and your data displays from your engine, plus a little twin USB charger there next to a cup holder, a drain cup holder, which actually is a good little spot to pop your phone while it's charging. Down below we also have the Fusion stereo, and that's about everything save for the compass up there on the dash top. There is a bit of glare because it's quite glossy black, but it's not too bad even on a very bright day like today. As regards the power on this boat, well, this particular show boat has been spec'd, as you can see, with a single Suzuki 200 horsepower outboard, which should be good to take this boat to around about 31 knots. But you can also spec it with 250 horsepower, which should be good for around about 35 knots. Now that's not mind-bendingly fast by any means, But for a boat that offers as much as this, it's very credible performance indeed. After all, what we have back here is an enormous 8 or 9 man convertible aft cockpit. We also have an equally versatile and particularly voluminous pilot house here, plus weekending facilities down below for 2 with a separate heads compartment. And let's not forget, you can also rig this port area as a second double berth. So essentially this is a weekender that will sleep 4 people. Now in terms of price, this particular showboat can be yours for around about £115,000 including VAT. But if you take the most basic options, then you can get this boat on the water including VAT ready to go for around about £106,000. And that represents an awful lot of boat and an awful lot of recreational versatility for the money.